My name is Bhaktisiddhanta Das, initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1975. The name came as a rather large shock to all the devotees in Los Angeles when we were first initiated. All the names were kind of given, leaked out before the actual initiation, before we were initiated. And so I have no reason to understand how this name came about, but when I was with Prabhupada in Vrindavan, I came to be introduced by Tamal Krishna to Srila Prabhupada. And with the introduction, he said my name. And as soon as my name was mentioned, Bhaktisiddhanta Das, the whole room filled up with laughter. It was all the GBCs and sannyasis were crammed into a little room right next to where Prabhupada, the garden where Prabhupada took prasadam. And so I'm on the floor. I paid my obeisances when I went into the darkened room. And I looked over at Prabhupada, and I was sinking into the floor, thinking, like, with a name like that, they're all thinking, who's this fool with this rascal with a big name like this? And I looked over at Prabhupada. He was effulgent. I mean, he lit up the whole room. It was a dark room. And so Prabhupada's effulgency just illuminated the whole space. And the big smile on his face and the empty tooth showed really prominent. It's like, it was just so dramatic. And so then Prabhupada told me to stay. I was introduced by Tamal that I was one of the FADE members. FADE was the first American theistic exhibition in Los Angeles. And so there we were doing the first dioramas for Srila Prabhupada, for the first museum that was being made in Los Angeles. Sorry. But so then Prabhupada immediately said, dioramas, Mayapur. So I was given Mayapur directly by Srila Prabhupada. And then a funny thing happened, and it happened quite often with Srila Prabhupada, not only to me, but just about everybody, is that as soon as you have a flash in your mind, Prabhupada picked up on the memory of that flash, and what was like initial reading of your mind. And so Prabhupada was a mind reader, like, par excellence. So he understood. I just got to Vrindavan. I wanted to see more of Vrindavan, but he interpreted from what he had picked up from my memory that I wanted to stay in Vrindavan. I didn't want that. I would have been very happy going to Mayapur at that time, but that was 40 years ago. And so what happened? I got to stay in Vrindavan. Prabhupada said, "Do it here. Do your work here in Vrindavan." And so after that, 40 years later, I am now here in Mayapur. So the transition of coming from Vrindavan to Mayapur is a big story. But let me flash back to, I was born and raised in upstate New York. And there we were searching for a guru. And in America, there's no way to find a guru. There's nobody that can give you information and knowledge about the basic facts of life. There's nothing that is given directly. I was raised and born a Catholic, and so when I talk to the priest or the nuns, ultimately it draws a big blank. Just believe. How do you want to know what God looks like? You want to know these questions can't be answered. There's no knowledge about that. So he discredited anything Vedic initially because there's no knowledge of it. In America, nobody has any idea of conceptual understanding of what Vedic means or of what India's knowledge and what was the commonplace here. And so I went through all the different authorities I could understand might have some knowledge. And so I find out that ultimately nobody has the knowledge. Nobody understood. So the knowledge that I did finally get came in an unusual manner. That my wife and I had just married. We had a revolutionary kind of a marriage. And so she was more eager than I to find spiritual life. And so it came down to a point I'd finished a big mural, 60-foot mural in this restaurant. And so and the next step was to find a spiritual master. As it happens, my wife was more eager for a spiritual life than I was. In fact, I was very uneager. I was very happy being an artist and working in my format. And so painting, sculpture, no sculpture, but painting became like my God. It was for me like, the answer to everything. And it started way back when I was in the 4th grade. One of the nuns put my pictures up on the wall. And ultimately I got immediately notification here that this is what you do in your life. And the nun said, Alfred, you have a gift from God. Use it in His service. And so that struck a real nice chord in my heart. And from that point on, I was like dedicating my life to God. That's from the 4th grade. That's like 8 years old. And so life goes on. And finally I graduated from high school as the best artist, and went in the Navy, was a Navy artist. Got rated as a 3rd-class petty officer, as a draftsman. And then ultimately back to art school, and where I got one of the most intensive training in art that is possible on this planet. The teachers were all professionals and very famous. And so they gave the knowledge of unbelievable depth into the idea of painting and drawing. And every day we were like, grounded in fine drawing. It had to be done really well. And so I have that background. And so the background allowed me to, at some point, do everything out of my mind. So very few artists, from what I've found, can actually do that. But I was trained in advertising, and it had to be done fast and out of your mind with no references, only your mind working. And so that became a very important tool to be used, throughout Krishna consciousness. And so I grew up this way, and I was a professor in painting at New York University for some years, and I had excellent results with the students I had. Amazing changes that people had in their idea of how to paint and draw. I was demonstrating in the classes, and they pick up on the method about which I learned in advertising, and learned from art school, and learned from practical use how to use paint and how to do it in an effective way. And so this goes on in the course of a whole lifetime, how to perfect the image making to the point where it's very quick, easy, and very strong and effective. And so I've done that now over the years. I've had 60 years in America, well, in America first, and then over 60 years in drawing, painting, and sculpting. As a conclusion of all of that, I walked by Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was on Lower East Side in 1966 after he came back from Butler. And so he was walking down the street in the Lower East Side, and I walked by this personality, and I saw something I never saw before. I mean, this saintly person with white pointed shoes and just strolling with his head up. And it had an impression, but it was just for a moment it walked by. Because New York, there were so many unusual sights. And being an artist, I've tuned to the faces and understanding what people are from what registers on their face. And so it happened right down near Tompkins Square Park. And he was by himself, so before any devotees. And he was just surveying the situation before he made the move. And then flash forward 10 years, and when I actually got the ability to see Prabhupada again directly as a spiritual master. I mean, before it was just a passing glance. But now we're sitting in LA Temple. It began the imagery for Chaitanya Charitamrita was just starting. After walking by Prabhupada in New York in 1966, it took me till 1975 before I actually became a devotee. And we joined in Miami, and Prabhupada was told an artist had joined in Miami, so immediately it was on that morning walk, the famous morning walk where he wanted 17 books in 17 weeks. And so having another artist seemed like, the ideal. And so I was told I submitted one painting to Jadharani, and on the basis of that painting I was selected to come and work with the artist and in Los Angeles. And so 2 weeks into the movement, living in Miami temple for just the introductory offer in Krishna consciousness, I was so amazed by what I saw. It was a deja vu, meaning I saw exactly where I picked up from my last life. I knew I was devoting my last life somehow or other. It was like a continuation. And then I saw everybody dancing around this plant. I said, these people got to be okay to dance around a plant and in such ecstasy. I mean, they were like the whole room was shaking from the movement of going around this, which was of course Tulsi.
Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Hare Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
And so we were flown to LA, and the first selection of meeting Prabhupada came that morning when he came in to greet the deities. And so the mind flash that I got was, well, you finally come. I mean, Prabhupada was like speaking to me through the mind. And so then he would be there in LA for about 10, 12 days in a row in 75 and 76. And so sometimes during the discourses, I looked around and I saw people all around me were sound asleep. They were like, in the class, sitting there. I was all the way in the back with my against the wall, so I was able to brace up and stay awake. And I looked at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada registered, whenever they give the side-to-side glance, it means he's understanding your thought. And so I was thinking that he was speaking to the whole world, the whole universe, and not just a bunch of sleepyheads. In any case, there was a lot of exchange with Prabhupada at that time. One morning walk, we arrived a little bit late, and Prabhupada was already walking. It was at Venice Beach, in a park above the beach. And so a very opulent garden paradise there, all green trees and beautifully kept. And Prabhupada was walking, but he wasn't touching the ground. And I saw that from a little distance, and I walked closer, and I could see that he was sort of floating, with his head up, and he never had to look down because his feet weren't touching the ground. That's why he was so fast, and everybody had to run to catch up with Prabhupada. And we're talking about 20-year-olds, marching along with a 70 more year, veteran of life in general. And so then on that morning walk, he mentioned something that just puzzled me. And of course, there are many things that are puzzling about Krishna consciousness, but Prabhupada had the ability to open it up and give you a very clear vision on any idea that you question him on. And so one was, the seer is the same, an awakened in a sleeping state. Now, what does that mean? I mean, it took me a while to understand what he was talking about. I mean, first off, there's initial shock of just being around Prabhupada, the intensity, the dramatic force that Prabhupada was giving to everything in his life. And so, and when he said that, the self, I mean, we're asleep or awake, ultimately we're being witnessed by Paramatma. And so it's the same. I mean, we're just like in a weekend. And what he did say about material life is that the only difference between a dream and a waking state is that we're dreaming longer. So it's all a dream. This whole thing is a concoction of our mental abilities. And what we are today is just a conglomerate of what we thought we wanted in our last life. So what we are born with in these bodies are just an ultimately, a conclusion of all our desires from previous life. And what we do next in these bodies will culminate in what happens in our next life. So I had a Brigu reading done, and the Brigu said, no more lifetimes. This is the last shot. In any case, we're making our pathway into the spiritual world. And so whatever we do is like registered in an indelible ink on the tablets of time that we're working. I listen to Prabhupada on tape. I'm making drawings and paintings of Prabhupada. I'm making murtis of Prabhupada. I made hundreds of murtis of Srila Prabhupada. Standing, walking, sitting, doing japa, instructing. And so my wife said to me, what do you need to do more? I says, you're fully Krishna conscious by being Prabhupada conscious. And so that's some substance of the whole spiritual life that we're blessed with. That to be in Mayapur, here we are. I'm right next door to the samadhi, which is right behind the trees here, and it's just unbelievable situation to go through so many trials and tribulations, and to finally come to a point where you're given the peace and the facility to do things that you only dreamed about was possible before. Now I was envious of the artists in LA when they were doing the books on CC. They had Prabhupada playing in the background, they were listening to Prabhupada and painting away. And we did that for Fate also. I was in charge of one area, making a change in body display. I made first a small model. When Prabhupada came through the Fate studios, he looked at that model, and Bardrad's, our leader, asked if he wanted that for his room. And so he just looked at it and summed up the whole thing. My room, he didn't have any rooms. It was like very clear that he wasn't really attached to anything in the material realm. And so he saw everything. And then there was a big change in body was just starting. So he looked at that and he glanced approval. Then he saw all these angels clamped to the ceiling, to the structures that were under the ceiling, high up. And he says, what are they? He says, they're Gandharvas, Srila Prabhupada. The Gandharvas don't have wings, and they all had wings. So it was like, oh my God, we did it wrong. Then we asked, what is Lord Brahma? It was one of the statues that we were making, one of the murtis. He said, well, if you want to know about Lord Brahma, just ask him, as if we had access to Lord Brahma. But Prabhupada did. He said, what do I need to know about the constable when I can talk to the prime minister? So he had connection with Krishna and everything he did. So talking to some of the demigods wasn't much of a feat. He did say in a few points some unusual things that happened. And one Prabhupada's servant was looking through the keyhole in Los Angeles, and he saw Prabhupada bathing in this light coming from nowhere. And the light had a focus on his body. It looked like crystal and diamond eyes, and it was effulgent, shining, and just another world. And so then he walked away from it and came back, a little bit later. Then he saw Prabhupada rolling on the floor in his room, or actually rolling by himself on the floor. And so what is that? So he asked Prabhupada later, I didn't want to bother you, but I saw first you were like rolling on the floor, and I wondered what happened. He said, oh, I'm sorry, I was just wrestling with Balaram. Wrestling with Balaram? And so Prabhupada had access not only to demigods, but to Krishna and Balaram direct. And so then he got a word from Lord Shiva, and this is Gaur Govinda telling the story that Prabhupada told Gaur Govinda. The reason he came to Bhubaneswar was because on the request of Lord Shiva, he says, you're going all over the world. He says, why don't you come to Bhubaneswar and see me? So Prabhupada has unbelievable access to all these demigods and to Krishna and Balaram, wrestling with Balaram. So I saw different things, miracles that Prabhupada performed innocently, not intentionally, but rather, Once he fell into ecstasy on the Vyasasan in Vrindavan, and Hansa Duda started a kirtan. They keep, fill up the space because it's all this silence. Nobody knew what to do. Prabhu was just like, gone. And later he asked Prabhupada if that was okay. If I did a kirtan, was I in order to do that? He said, yes, but I'm very sorry, I won't do it again. It won't happen again. He apologized for falling in an ecstatic trance. That's Prabhupada's humility. And so many moments would go by, and a lot of success in the years that I've been Krishna conscious, over the 40 years in Vrindavan and the years here now in Mayapur. Many things have manifested, and many things were empowerment. And I told Sarab and Ganarnava, you were empowered to do these things when you were, in the beginning stages, when it was all brand new. The empowerment comes to all these innocent young, at that time, 20, 25 maximum. I was 32, 33 when I joined the movement. So I was an older person. But everybody got empowerment to do certain things. And so we all had that from the very beginning. And when Prabhupada empowered you, you had the ability to what was not common anymore, but unusual things took place. And so what I've done in the years, I've done Prabhupada Murtis, like, in the hundreds. And then Vrindavan, we made 8 panels for the samadhi. But at that time, I was actually in the Navy before, and I was trained up in the American Navy to be able to be functioning properly as a devotee, because it's as heavy as the military is, being in the devotional line, because the opposition comes amongst God brothers. Our Prabhupada went around the world 14 times in 12 years. Why? Because he wanted to try to stop anybody from killing each other. And the whole understanding about spiritual life means that it refers back to a moment when Prabhupada was walking through the dioramas in the LA center that we had through fate. I asked in my mind, I was told that Prabhupada understood ESP, extrasensory perception. And so I just had in my mind, you're standing right next to me. I said, Srila Prabhupada, what is this? I've encountered artists all my life, and I never had the conflicts and the stabbing in the back and the criticism that's going on in this movement and here in LA. And Prabhupada turned and looked at me, and just in my mind I got the message, just wait, you'll see. Within a couple of weeks, I understood that all the different leaders in our society in LA were not chanting. There was about 4 or 5. And so they were just like, showing their hand, the feedback. And so it's all the basis of what our movement's all about. If we're chanting our rounds, following the program, ultimately Prabhupada said in one class, I saw that in my own eyes, Prabhupada saying this, and heard it, that I will guarantee all of you will go back home, back to Godhead in this life. So it doesn't matter whatever happens, as long as we're following the program, serving Srila Prabhupada, ultimately we get a chance to go right back home, back to Godhead. And so there were moments when, like one kirtan that came when Prabhupada was dancing, he got up out of Vyasasan and started dancing. And the whole place went wild. It was like kirtan was just busting through the roof. It was like an amazing, amazing event that took place. And so, everybody was kind of looking at each other, and what is happening here? Is all of a sudden the spiritual world descended on Los Angeles. And so after it was over, we took a deep breath, and we started coming out of the temple and asking about this, what happened. But before we had a chance to get out, Prabhupada explained it. He says, you know what happened just now? He says, we had some famous personalities here. And he says, who was here? They asked him. He says, well, Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, and we had Narada Muni, of course, he's always available. And he says, they were all laughing. And why were they laughing? Because of all the Malechas and Yavanas dancing in kirtan. They thought that was the funniest thing they ever seen. So unheard of at that point, because now the demigods are coming in to observe us as we're going into our spiritual life here on this planet.